Welcome back, everyone. In this lesson, we will deal with score. We will also define when our bird scores, and we will add tap to restart text. So let's do the easy one first, our tap to restart text. So go to hierarchy, right-click, UI, and choose text. This text will be labeled as tap text, and it will say tap to flap. Let's change the font of it. So go to Project, Folder Fonts, click on Luckiest Guy and drag it to our font in Inspector. Change the font size to 30 and color to white. Let's zoom out to see where our text is. As you can see, we only have tab 2, so our flap is missing. So go to Inspector and find Horizontal Overflow and choose Overflow. There it is. We should also add shadow. So go to Add Component and type shadow. Effect distance will be 2 and -2. We want to make our tap text dependent on the game over text. So when the game over text is invisible, our tap text should be invisible too. And when our game over text is visible, meaning when our bird dies, our tap text should be visible too. We will do that by making tap text child of game over text. So click on tap text and drag it over the game over text. Now it is invisible, so go ahead to game over text and make it visible. Let's also move and resize our tab text accordingly. Let's move to our score text. Because our score text will be similar to our tab text, we can just duplicate our tab text. So right-click on tab text and click duplicate. Let's change the label to score text, and text should say score. You can also see that our score text is child of the game over text, which we do not want, so move score text over the canvas and make our game over text invisible by clicking on game over text, going to Inspector and unchecking this box next to the label. Now let's deal with our score text. Move it wherever you wanna. I will place it in the left corner. And I want to make sure that it doesn't interfere with my game over text. This looks okay to me. Now let's define when our bird scores. First, we will add the obstacles, which we will find in our project, Sprites, and Column Sprite. Click on it, go to Inspector, change Sprite Mode to Multiple, and click on Sprite Editor, Apply, and let's separate our pipes. Go to Slice, and click on Slice Button. Make sure they are separated and click Apply. You can exit Sprite Editor, find column Sprite 1 and 0, and drag them to our hierarchy. To hold both columns under one object, we will create an empty object and make columns a child of it. So click in hierarchy, right-click, create empty, change the name to columns or pipes, and hit enter. Let's drag our column sprite 0 and column sprite 1 into the columns. Click on column sprite 0, go to sprite renderer and choose sorting layer to be back, and also do the same for column sprite 1. Let's reposition them. Make sure that bird has lots of space to go through. Now set pipes to equal X position. We can say X to be 4 for both of them, just to place them one underneath each other. Next thing we should do is add colliders. Click on column sprite 0, add component, physics 2D, box collider 2D. Now click on column sprite 1, add component, physics 2D, box collider 2D. They look okay. Now let's think what makes our bird score. Our bird scores whenever it passes between two columns. How should we check when our bird passed in between these columns? Well, we should just add collider between them. And when our bird makes it to the end of the collider, meaning when it passes collider, we should add 1 to her score. So click on columns. Because collider will be between them, it will be applied to both of them. Go to Add Component, Physics 2D, Box Collider 2D. Click on Add Collider, and my collider is positioned on bird, so I will just move it between columns. Since we are dealing with columns, let's make them scroll now. It's the same thing as we did with our background. We have an effect that our bird is moving towards the columns, but actually the columns are moving towards our bird, towards the middle of our camera. In order to make our columns move, we have to make a script, and before that, we have to add Rigid Body 2D. So click on Columns, go to Inspector, Add Component, Physics 2D, Rigid Body 2D. And as we did with our background, we do not want our columns to be affected by gravity, so we'll change body type to kinematic. Find Rigid Body 2D, body type, kinematic. Let's also add a script to our columns. Add component. We will name our script columns, hit enter, and create an ad. Move to our project, and as you can see, our column script is created. Move it to our scripts folder, and double-click to open it. First thing we should do is make a variable for our rigid body. It will be private rigid body 2D called RB. Let's define our RB in start. RB equals getComponent rigid body 2D. In order to make our columns moving, we will add velocity to their rigid body. So rb.velocity equals new vector 2 with the x value the same as we had in our background, so -1, and y value will be 0 because we do not want it to move up and down. Also, when our bird dies, we have to stop our columns from scrolling. So go to Update method. Check if our bird died. As you remember, we have a method in game controls that is called bird died, and we can use it in our columns. So go to Update and type if name of the class is game controls dot instance dot method name is endgame is true, then we have to stop scrolling. So our rigid body will lose its velocity. rb.velocity equals vector2.0. Let's save and get back to Unity to check how it looks like. Our bird died because it hit collider. That's why we have to make the collider between columns a trigger. So click on Columns, go to Box Collider 2D, and check is Trigger. This means we are using our box collider as a trigger, not as an obstacle. Let's click play to see how it looks like. So our bird goes right through it, which is okay. And now let's count our score. Let's go back to our game control script. And here we will make our score. Since we will be using score text, and text is a type of UI, meaning user interface, we have to add using Unity Engine.UI. Now let's make variable for score. It will be private integer named score, and it will be initialized to 0. And in order to use our score text that we made, we also have to make a variable for it, which is public text called score text. Now let's make separate method for when our bird scores. Right underneath the bird type, type public void bird scored. So when our bird scores, we want to increase the score integer. So type score becomes score plus 1, meaning it increments by 1. And now we have to project this text to our score text in Unity. We will do that by typing score text, which is our variable for our score text in Unity, dot text becomes quotation marks, and write the same text as you wrote for our score text. For me, it was just score colon. And now we add our score integer plus score.toString, and we actually converted our score, which is integer, to string, meaning if our score was 11, our score.toString will also be 11, but as a string, so we can display it in our text. We are done with our game controls, we can save it and go back to our columns to specify when our bird scores. So our bird scores when it enters Collider between the columns. If you remember, we have a special method called onColliderEnter2D, meaning when our bird hits Collider, we can specify what happens. Well, we will now use the similar method, which is called onTriggerEnter2D, because our Collider is actually now the trigger. So let's go ahead and use this method. Type private void onTriggerEnter2D. As you can see, this method takes one parameter, which is Collider2D, with the label collision, and we will use this to check if our bird has entered this trigger. So type if collision.getComponent called bird is not equal to null, meaning if our bird hits this collider, we will notify our game controls that our bird scored. So open the brackets and type gamecontrols.instance.birdscored. So with this method, we checked if our bird hits the trigger collider that we set between the columns, and if it does, we tell the game controls that our bird has scored. Now let's go ahead and save everything. As you remember, in our game controls, we added this score text, which is public, so we have to add it in Unity too. Go back to Unity, click on Game Controls in our hierarchy, find our score text in Canvas, and drag it to Game Controls. And let's see how it looks like. So our bird actually passed through our trigger and had the score 1. Let's try again. And there it is, our score is counting, and that is everything for this lesson.